Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Today we are here to create a tier list for the Set 19 Fighters Ambition archetypes. We've had about a week to play with this set, and Nationals is coming up very soon, so I figured it was time to go ahead and rank these decks. I've got the tiers here: Tier 1, Tier 2, Rogue, and Stinker. I know I change the tiers every single time I do a tier list. There's no real uniform way to rank decks in terms of card games. Like, people always have their different opinions of like what tier 1.5 means, what tier 2 means, what Rogue means. This is just how I felt this set makes sense to rank, because like I've said in other videos, I don't think the archetypes are all that incredible to where there might be one that reaches up to 1.5, but if I somehow convince myself otherwise throughout this video, I'll kind of just make mention of it throughout. But yeah, we've got tier 1, which is like a deck that's you know, real competitive, real strong, can compete with the likes of SS4 Gogeta, Sin Shenron, maybe even SS3 Reboot if you want to throw that in tier 1. So that'll be the category for tier 1. Tier 2, like I said, there's no real 1.5 in my opinion this time around. Like, I think there's decks that are better than others, and it's a little bit more clear cut. So tier 2 is you know, something that can do well if you put a lot of time into it, but probably going to be a good bit weaker than the rest. Rogue is even more sporadic than that. This deck can maybe show some potential, but I don't know if it's going to be necessarily a great pick for Nats or anything like that. And then Stinker, just trash tier stuff. We'll talk about that as we go through. But if you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys do want to support the channel, there are lots of ways to do so down in the description. But if you really want to support, consider checking out the Patreon. You can read the articles that I post there. You can also inquire about coaching, but it really just does help out quite a bit. Anyways, let's go right into the tier list. Let's start with Magenta. Magenta has been on a really big roller coaster as far as Set 19 goes. That's because the leader was originally worded to say you could only play villainous cards, meaning you can only play villainous battle cards and the one villainous extra card that exists, and you cannot play any unisons, any other battle cards, any other extra cards. This has now been changed to where Magenta can play whatever villainous battle cards it wants, but it can also play unisons and extra cards. That is really important for Magenta. That's a really big buff. And there's also something going on with the Mercenary Tau 1-drop in the deck. I don't know if you guys have actually seen that, but there's a difference in wording between King Garumes and Mercenary Tau, to where I think like the way it's going to be ruled is Mercenary Tau doesn't actually negate its villainous skill if you play it as a 1-drop. Obviously, that'll be up to the discretion of the head judge at Nationals. Mercenary Tau says negate this skill, which some judges are saying only applies to the one on play auto, whereas King Garumes says negate this card's skills, which implies all the skills of the battle card. That is a really big buff for Magenta in a lot of ways. So with that in mind, we haven't had a good hand control deck in quite some time. I'm not really ready to say Magenta looks like tier 1 because I just haven't seen the results to support that, or the data, or the testing, but I do think it's probably the best hand control deck. That might be a bit ambitious, but since it is like the top rating hand control deck in my opinion, it's going to go somewhere between tier 2 and Rogue. I think there is always going to be a spot for hand control in the format, especially if blue ends up being quite strong. So that's why I'm inclined to put it in tier 2, but this can easily be Rogue. You know, hand control is not what it once was, especially looking at last stats. So maybe tier 2 is a bit generous. This might change by the end of the video. All right, we have the GVT archetype, the Goku, Vegeta, Trunks archetype. I really want to put this in Stinker, man. This is like, I really don't like this deck. First of all, there's Sin and Gogeta. So for red, you're completely outclassed. Then you can look at decks like Pan, which is definitely better than this. You've got decks like Red Vegito, which, I mean, I just did the deck profile last week. I don't really consider Vegito to be a pure red deck, but it's still a red leader deck, so that's better than this as well. This is kind of like Yellow Trunks, but just like worse in most ways. Like, you get the 1-drops played from the drop area, but in this deck their skills are negated, and you can evolve over them, but the evolves are not really impressive, and the boss monster, in my opinion, also not impressive. It is cool that it's an 8-drop barrier, so it can stick around, but it's hard to actually get out onto the board requiring 5 cards underneath it, as well as if you use its ultimate effect, you lose the battle card like right after that, which is just not very good. Yeah, for me, this is a stinker. Android 13, probably going right above it in Rogue. Now, I've talked about this a lot. I really like this deck. One, from the design perspective, I love the fact that this deck can play all types of Android 13 cards. I love the way they allow that to work in the deck. Of course, again, you're outclassed by SS4 and by Sin, so you can't really ask for much better than Rogue. You're probably, I don't know, actually, I would probably say this deck can go pretty well head-to-head with Pan, my personal opinion. But still, while SS4 and Sin are decks, this unfortunately can't be any better than Rogue, I don't think. All right, Green Gogeta. This might be an unpopular opinion to some. Others, I think, will agree with me. I am personally going to go ahead and put this deck in the stinker category. We tried this deck extensively. We tried it with Unisons. We tried it with high counts of Gokus and Vegetas. We tried it with low counts of Gokus and Vegetas. We tried this deck in so many different ways, so many different builds, and it just doesn't get there. The main problem with this deck is that, one, it doesn't generate Z energy for any value. You are just comboing cards out of your hand, and yes, they evolve from the Z energy. I understand that. It's just not very good. Those cards you put in your Z energy, you can't really use them for Z energy costs. So even getting Z awakened is very, very awkward. Here's the thing I've noticed about Dragon Ball with, Zenkai being a thing for at least like one set now. You're gonna generate more Z energy against more aggressive decks because they're gonna be attacking you. You're gonna be comboing out of attack, so you'll make more Z energy that way naturally. And when you make Z energy through super combos or maybe 5K here and there, it doesn't feel as bad as having to just attack, combo a card for no reason, and put it in your Z energy just because it has an effect there, right? And again, it's very awkward to actually pay Z energy costs using these cards that have effects in your Z energy. So I think the deck is just really rough from a design standpoint. That kind of just always seems to be the case when it comes to a green deck. Again, I know a lot of people do like this deck. I really just don't see it right now. Then we have Green Extra Broly. Gonna throw this one in Rogue. So there are a couple things I do like about Green Extra Broly. It's got some pretty free hand control just from the leader, like tucking an extra under your leader and then making your opponent pitch a card. That is actually just free, make your opponent pitch one. That is really, really cool. I think this deck can do well against blue decks and decks that slow the pace of the game down, but against anything that's fast, I do think it's very hard to play Extra Broly. I've talked about this before as well. I've talked about all these decks, so I've probably said that a bunch of times. But with Green Extra Broly, your hand size is very small. Yes, you have the extras under your leader and sometimes under your battle cards, but with your hand being so small, one, it's hard to charge, and two, it can be very difficult to combo out of those early attacks. Like, there is nearly nothing you can do about Sen Shenron hitting you for that double or triple crit, especially if they go first. So that's a really rough matchup. I think this could be looked at as like a triangular deck where it can do well against the blue decks, but it's going to struggle pretty hard against red aggro, namely red Sin. So I can't justify putting this any higher than Rogue, but I do like it more than Green Gogeta, so we're going to put it up in the Rogue tier. Again, hand control doesn't really have a true rep this format, and I wouldn't say Green Broly is like a real hand control deck. It's not nearly as taxing on the hand as like Magenta is, but I think it's decent. All right, Yellow Slug. This is a deck that I really want to like. There are a lot of cards in the Slug engine that I do think are pretty strong and pretty cool, but it's just got too much gimmick going for its own good. Like, it starts 6 life, and when Bandai did that with King Piccolo, I think they did that because they knew how broken that deck could possibly be. This, I don't think, is anywhere near the same circumstance. Like, you're still a combo-centric deck, which is similar to KP, but all your combos cost 1 energy, and there's not really any way to combo them for free until you get to your Z leader. And that's the thing about the yellow decks. I really, really like the Z leaders of the yellow decks in Fighter's Ambition, but the rest of the cards in the decks are just not that great. So I'm probably going to put Lord Slug and Stinker. I've seen some people talk about the fact that Slug can't be decent if you just play good yellow cards and the correct ratios of Slug stuff, but I think the Slug stuff honestly just bogs the deck down. I don't know. Again, this is one that I'm not seeing. Maybe with some future support, this could be pretty cool, but having to do all that comboing that costs 1, again, especially in a format where Sin exists, it's just way too dangerous to be competitive. Then we have Piccolo Orange, or Orange Piccolo, I guess. Orange Piccolo, I like the concept a lot. The number one thing I hate about this deck, though, is how it relies on the Z-Deck Shenron. That card is so bad, unfortunately. Yeah, I know, you combo, you draw a card, that's great, but it is a battle card that has absolutely no protection from removal, and that card is kind of like your main draw engine. So when that's just a simple 15k sitting out there on the board to be removed, it's not going to bode very well in a competitive environment. So I do like the leader quite a bit. I love the fact you can block for your unisons. I think that's a really cool thing. I'm going to put it in Rogue because I think it has a better shot of doing anything than Slug does, but I think this is even maybe a little bit generous in my opinion. All right, then we have Blue Gotenks. This is a leader that I really do like. I love the fact the leader can attack multiple times. I like the fact that it generates Z energy by comboing on the unawakened side. I think it synergizes very, very well with Goku and Vegeta Immortal Rivalry out of set 19, but there's other blue decks. This is what I classify as a mid-range blue deck, and that kind of sits in the same realm as like Gamma and SS3. where these are not blue decks that are playing game-ending bombs like Turning the Tide or Kale. They're more so blue decks that are better positioned against aggro, but again, can't really play those game-ending bombs. So as far as blue mid-range goes, I'm not ready to say Go Tanks is any better than Gamma or SS3. So I'm probably going to throw it in Rogue tier. I really wouldn't call it a stinker. I think this deck operates smoothly. I do like a lot of the cards that are found in the deck. So yeah, I'm going to put it in Rogue here. Blue Gohan, wrapping up the video on Blue Gohan. I know a lot of people love this deck. It did take big hits on the set 19 ban list, with Bean getting errata to no longer be able to be used offensively. That is incredibly significant for this deck. But with that being said, this deck can still put on a lot of aggressive pressure. The deck is still solid at doing that, obviously just a little bit less so. I think that it can actually compete with the aggro decks like Sin, Gogeta. I think this is the only deck for this set that we're actually going to put into tier 1 competitive. This deck is going to be something to look out for going into nationals. Yeah, just seems like a very strong deck. All right, so going over this list, obviously you can see it's very, very lopsided. A lot of decks towards the Rogue and Stinker category. That's mainly because nothing on the set 19 ban list directly hit the really strong decks. Like, yeah, we saw generic hits to red, but and I guess one generic hit to blue, but those weren't enough to actually bring the power level of Gogeta or Sin down. They're still the best decks in their color. So for that reason, we've got Gohan being the only deck that can compete in tier 1 because it's just that aggressive and that fast. Magenta, again, this might be a little bit generous, but I think it could be the best hand control deck out there. That might not be saying much, though, without hand control having a true rep for the past couple formats. Rogue, A13, outclassed. Green Broly, bad red matchups. Orange Piccolo, unfortunately, unimpressive cards in its strategy. Go Tanks, I do want to look out for this deck in the future. I think it does some cool things, but right now, just not quite seeing it. And then the Stinkers, yeah, these decks don't really have a shot in my personal opinion. But of course, if you agree or disagree with anything I talked about in this video, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.